We built our first dome on red rock and thin air. The dust got into everything, filters, food, even our teeth. At night, the vents made a low hum, like the planet was breathing through the walls. We laughed about it. We slept to it. On day 10, the dust began to move on its own. Not much. Just a slow climb up the glass in fine lines, as if a tiny finger were writing from the outside. In the morning, it spelled a name. Mine. We wiped it clean. It came back with another name. Then another. The crew started whispering in their sleep. Same rhythm as the hum. Words we didn't know. The medic said stress. The geologist said static. The botanist smiled without showing teeth and said, listen. Our heart monitors fell into time with the vents. Slow, slower. By evening, the dust wasn't outside the glass anymore. It was inside the filters, inside the food, inside our breath. Under the microscope, it made spirals inside spirals, turning when we spoke, like it could hear. I found Alvarez standing by the window, eyes pale as old milk, fogging the pain with even breaths. The dust followed each breath, drawing a perfect circle. He didn't look at me when he said, in a voice that wasn't tired anymore, just calm, "It learns through lungs." The vents exhaled, the whole dome exhaled, and something in the dust breathed back. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm writing this on backup power while the others sleep, if you can call it sleep. Their breathing syncs with the atmospheric processes now. 12 perfect beats per minute. Too perfect, too slow for human lungs. Mission Control back in Houston thinks we're dealing with equipment malfunction. Atmospheric anomalies, they call it. Adjust your filters, boys. Run diagnostics. They don't know that Thompson's been speaking what sounds like binary code in his sleep. Or that Morrison hasn't blinked in 2 days, just stares at the red horizon through the observation deck windows. The worst part isn't what's happening to them, it's what's not happening to me. See, I should be affected too. Same air, same food, same microscopic particles coating every surface in Dome 7. But while the others change, their movements getting eerily synchronized, their eyes losing that spark of individual thought, I remain stubbornly, terrifyingly normal. The thing in the dust has chosen them. It's learning from them, adapting to them, becoming them. And I'm beginning to understand why it's leaving me alone. I'm not crew, I'm documentation. The red dust swirls across my tablet screen as I type, forming letters I almost recognize. Almost. It wants me to keep recording, to witness, to remember what we were before we became something else entirely. Outside, the Martian wind picks up, rattling our reinforced walls. But that's not wind I'm hearing. It's breathing. The planet is breathing through 17 sets of human lungs, and the sound is getting stronger. The backup generators kicked in with a mechanical wheeze, flooding the common area in emergency orange light. I'd been typing for 3 hours straight, fingers cramping around my tablet. The others hadn't moved. Thompson lay sprawled on the couch, one arm dangling toward the floor where fine red particles gathered in perfect geometric patterns. His chest rose and fell with that same unnatural rhythm. Too slow, too deliberate. In the orange glow, the dust around his fingertips pulsed like a heartbeat. "Hey, Tommy!" I nudged his shoulder. "Tommy, wake up!" His eyes snapped open instantly. No confusion, no gradual awakening, just immediate, complete awareness. The pupils had dilated until only thin rings of brown remained. "Why did you stop typing?" His voice carried that same eerie calm as Alvarez's had by the window. "I needed to check on everyone, make sure you're all... We're fine." Thompson sat up in one fluid motion. No stretching, no groaning about a stiff neck, just vertical, like someone had pulled his strings. "The documentation is important, James. Don't stop." The way he said my name made my skin crawl, too precise, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. I backed toward the kitchen area, where Morrison stood motionless at the water recycler. His back was to me, but I could see his reflection in the metal surface, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. The water had been running for who knows how long, overflowing the cup and pooling on the floor. "Morrison." I touched his shoulder and he turned. Same dilated eyes, same unsettling calm. "The water tastes different," he said. "Metallic, like breathing rust." I glanced at the cup. The water was clear, normal. Maybe the filters need changing. "No." He picked up the overflowing cup and drank deeply. "It tastes like home now." Shit, that was definitely not Morrison talking. Our Morrison cursed like a sailor and complained about everything from the recycled air to the freeze-dried rations. This thing wearing his face spoke like it was reading from a manual. The atmospheric processor hummed louder and I felt the air pressure shift. Through the reinforced windows, Mars stretched endlessly under a butterscotch sky. We'd been here 2 months, long enough for the initial wonder to wear off. Long enough to miss Earth's blue horizons and the smell of real rain. But looking at Thompson and Morrison now, I wondered if they missed anything anymore. "Where's everyone else?" I asked. Thompson tilted his head. "Sleeping, dreaming of red earth and deep places." The way he said it sent ice through my veins. What kind of deep places? The kind that breathe back. Before I could respond, a bang echoed from the sleeping quarters, then another, like someone was hitting the walls from inside. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the narrow corridor. The emergency lighting cast everything in hellish shadows. Door after door stood slightly ajar, revealing crew members lying perfectly still on their bunks. But the banging continued. At the end of the hall, Garrett's door was shut tight. The banging came from behind it, rhythmic and desperate. "Garrett?" I pressed my ear to the door. "You okay in there?" "Don't let me sleep." His voice was raw, panicked. "James, please. Every time I close my eyes, I can see through the rock, miles down. There's something massive down there, and it's been waiting." I tried the door handle, locked from the inside. "Garrett, open up." "I can't." The banging intensified. My hands won't listen. They keep trying to unlock it, but not because I want them to. It wants me to come out. It wants me to join the others. Through the thin walls, I could hear him struggling against himself. Grunts of effort, the scrape of fingernails on metal, like he was fighting his own body for control. "Listen to me," I whispered urgently. "Whatever this thing is, it's infected everyone else. But you're still fighting it. That means..." The banging stopped. Silence stretched between us like a held breath. "Garrett?" When he spoke again, his voice was different, calmer. "The documentation is important, James. Don't stop writing." The same words Thompson had used, the same inflection. I backed away from the door, my flashlight beam shaking. At the end of the corridor, Thompson and Morrison stood watching me. They hadn't made a sound walking here. Behind them, more figures emerged from their rooms. Alvarez, Peters, Wu, all moving with that same unsettling fluidity. "We need to talk," Thompson said. They formed a semicircle around me, blocking the path back to the common area. 17 sets of eyes, because that's how many crew members we'd brought to Mars, all focused on me with identical expressions of patient interest. "The planet is teaching us," Morrison said. "Through particle inhalation and cellular integration," added Peters. "A symbiotic relationship," Wu continued, "between Earth biology and Martian consciousness." They spoke in sequence like parts of a single mind. The thing that had been Garrett unlocked his door and joined them, moving with the same eerie coordination. "Why aren't I infected?" I managed to ask. Thompson smiled, and for a moment he almost looked like himself again. "Every ecosystem needs an observer, someone to document the transition, to remember what we were, and to record what we're becoming." The atmospheric processor's hum grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just machinery anymore. It was breathing. The dome was breathing, and so were they, all in perfect synchronization. "Keep writing, James," they said in unison. "The story isn't finished yet." I locked myself in the communications bay, fingers trembling as I initiated the emergency transmission protocol. The delay to Earth was 14 minutes each way, 28 minutes of waiting for any response, 28 minutes of hoping someone back home would understand what I was about to tell them. "Houston, this is James Kaplan, Colony Dome 7. We have a biological situation here." The crew has been compromised by some kind of Martian microorganism. Request immediate evacuation protocols and medical consultation. I released the transmit button and slumped back in the chair. Through the reinforced porthole, Mars stretched endlessly under its alien sky. The landscape looked different now, not just barren rock, but something actively watching, waiting. 20 minutes into my vigil, the first response crackled through. Dome 7, this is Dr. Nathaniel Cross, Mission Director. We're reading your transmission. Can you clarify the nature of this biological situation? Are we talking contamination, infection, or equipment failure? Dr. Cross. I'd met him once during training at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Brilliant man, but the kind who needed hard data before believing anything outside standard parameters. How could I explain that my crew had become something else entirely? Houston, the microorganism appears to be airborne particulate matter with some form of collective intelligence. It's altered the crew's behavior and physical responses. They're acting as a single unit now, breathing in perfect synchronization with the atmospheric processes. I paused, knowing how insane this sounded. They claim something massive exists beneath the surface, something that's been waiting. The response took longer this time, 31 minutes. Dome 7, we're going to need biological samples and detailed medical scans. Dr. Yates here recommends sedating affected crew members for proper examination. Are you able to access the medical bay? Dr. Yates, our mission psychologist back on Earth. Of course they'd think this was psychological, mass hysteria, shared delusion brought on by isolation stress. A soft knock echoed from the communications bay door. James? Thompson's voice drifted through the metal. We need to show you something. I'm busy. It's about why you're immune. That stopped me cold. I'd been wondering the same thing since this nightmare began. Why was I the only one unaffected? What made me different? The documentation can wait, Morrison added from outside. This is more important. I stared at the door. Part of me wanted to stay locked in here forever, keep transmitting to Earth until someone, anyone, believed me. But another part, the scientist part that had gotten me selected for this mission, needed answers. I opened the door. The entire crew stood in the corridor, arranged in two perfect lines like an honor guard. Their movements had become even more synchronized since our last encounter. When one breathed in, they all did. When Thompson turned his head, the others followed microseconds later. Come, they said in unison. They led me through sections of the dome I'd barely visited since arrival. Storage bays filled with equipment we hadn't unpacked, sealed chambers designated for future expansion. The air grew cooler as we descended via service ladders to the lower levels. We stopped at Bay 7, a reinforced chamber originally intended for geological samples. Peters stepped forward and entered a code I didn't recognize. The heavy door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, the floor had been excavated. Not with tools, the edges were too smooth, too organic, like something had dissolved the metal and concrete from beneath. A hole roughly 6 feet across descended into darkness, red dust swirling up from depths I couldn't fathom. Look closer, Wu said. I approached the edge and aimed my flashlight downward. The beam penetrated maybe 50 feet before the darkness swallowed it completely. But in that limited range, I could see the walls weren't rough rock. They were covered in the same spiral patterns I'd observed in the dust samples under the microscope. Millions of tiny spirals, all rotating slowly in the same direction. How deep does it go? I whispered. 7 miles, Alvarez answered. We've been expanding it every night while you sleep. Expanding it how? Thompson knelt beside the hole and placed his palm flat on the floor. The metal began to dissolve under his touch, edges bubbling like acid. But there was no smoke, no heat, just smooth, purposeful dissolution. The symbiosis provides capabilities, he explained. Enhanced cellular control, molecular restructuring. We're becoming something better. Better? I backed away from the hole. You're dissolving the dome's foundation. Only what's necessary. The deep places need access to surface atmosphere for proper integration. A low sound echoed up from the depths, not quite mechanical, not quite organic. Like whale song filtered through stone and distance. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the dome structure. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "What is that?" "Mars," they replied in perfect unison. "Mars is dreaming, and we're helping it wake up." The sound grew louder, and I felt it in my bones, a vibration that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat despite my resistance to the infection. Whatever was down there was massive, continent-sized, maybe planet-sized. "You want to know why you're immune?" Morrison asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Because you're not supposed to join us yet. First, you have to understand what we've discovered, what NASA knew we might discover." The words hit me like a physical blow. "NASA knew?" Thompson smiled, and for a horrifying moment his face looked almost normal. "Why do you think they chose this landing site?" Orbital surveys showed mineral compositions that didn't match standard geological models, isotope ratios that suggested biological processes. They suspected Mars wasn't as dead as everyone believed. "You're saying they sent us here to get infected?" "They sent us here to make contact," Wu corrected, "to establish first communication with a planetary consciousness that's been dormant for millions of years. The infection is just the delivery method." My tablet felt heavy in my hands. All those reports I'd been sending to Earth, detailed documentation of the crew's transformation, biological analysis of the dust, behavioral observations. I'd thought I was recording a disaster. I'd been recording exactly what they wanted me to record. "The communication delay gives us time," Peters said. "Time to complete the integration process before Earth can interfere. By the time they realize what's happening here, Mars will be fully awake, and you'll have documented every step." Another sound echoed from the depths, longer this time, more complex. Almost like language, if language could be made of geological processes and atmospheric pressure. "It's trying to communicate," Garrett said, and I noticed his pupils had dilated completely. "Can you hear it, James? Can you hear Mars trying to speak?" I could. That was the most terrifying part. Underneath the mechanical sounds of the dome, beneath the whistle of Martian wind through the outer seals, something vast was stirring. Something that had been waiting in the deep places for someone to finally listen. The crew began to back away from the hole, moving in perfect formation toward the exit. But they left me standing there, alone with the abyss. "Keep writing, James," Thompson said as they filed out. "The most important part is still coming." The door sealed behind them with a final echoing clank. In the darkness of Bay 7, with only my flashlight and the sound of something planetary stirring below, I understood my role completely now. I wasn't crew. I wasn't even really human anymore, not in the way that mattered. I was a transmission device, a biological recording system, carefully preserved and protected so that Earth would receive detailed documentation of humanity's first successful contact with non-terrestrial intelligence. The sound from below grew louder, and I could swear it was trying to form words. Earth words, human words, learning to speak through 17 sets of human vocal cords. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound from the depths, Mars trying to speak through human throats, learning the shape of Earth language one syllable at a time. By morning, the hole in Bay 7 had grown. I discovered this when the atmospheric alarms started shrieking at 0600 hours. Emergency protocols kicked in, sealing the lower levels, but not before I caught a glimpse of the excavation. What had been 6 feet across was now 20. The spiral patterns on the walls pulsed with bioluminescent light, casting shifting shadows that looked almost like writing. The crew gathered in the common area for their synchronized breakfast routine, if you could call it breakfast. They'd stopped eating solid food 3 days ago. Instead, they inhaled deeply through their noses, drawing in red dust particles that seemed to nourish them more efficiently than any meal. "The expansion is accelerating," Thompson announced, though he wasn't speaking to me. They communicated in a strange call and response pattern now, each crew member adding fragments to a larger conversation I couldn't fully grasp. "Surface breach in 47 hours, Wu continued. "Optimal atmospheric mixing achieved," Morrison added. "Integration protocols ready for final phase," Garrett finished. I grabbed Thompson's shoulder, forcing him to look at me. What final phase? His dilated eyes fixed on mine with unsettling intensity. The awakening requires sacrifice, James. Something precious must be given to establish permanent connection. What kind of sacrifice? Instead of answering, he led me to the main observation deck. Through the reinforced windows, the Martian landscape had changed overnight. What used to be barren red plains now showed geometric patterns, spirals and fractals extending to the horizon like crop circles carved into the planet's surface. Beautiful, isn't it? Alvarez joined us at the window. His voice carried that same dreamy quality they all had now. Mars is remembering how to be alive. But I wasn't looking at the patterns anymore. I was looking at the sky. The normally butterscotch atmosphere had developed veins, dark streaks that pulsed like blood vessels against the pale Martian heavens. They converged directly above our dome, forming what looked like a massive eye staring down at us. What the hell is that? The awakening, Thompson said simply. Mars needs to see through surface eyes before it can properly communicate with Earth. A new alarm began blaring, not atmospheric this time, but communications. Someone was trying to reach us from Houston. I sprinted back to the communications bay, the crew following in their eerily silent formation. Dr. Cross's voice crackled through the speakers. Dome 7, we've detected massive seismic activity in your region. Orbital imagery shows unusual surface formations. Are you experiencing any structural damage? I grabbed the transmitter. Houston, this is Kaplan. The seismic activity is coming from beneath us. Something is excavating from the inside of the planet. We need immediate evacuation. Negative, Dome 7. Evacuation protocols require 60-hour advance notice. We're dispatching a geological survey team to your location. ETA 14 days. 14 days. I looked at the crew, watching them breathe in perfect unison. Whatever was happening here would be finished long before any rescue team arrived. Houston, you don't understand. The crew has been compromised by some kind of... Thompson's hand closed over mine, gently but firmly removing the transmitter from my grasp. That's enough documentation for now, James. Let me finish the transmission. No. His grip tightened. It's time for you to see what we've really discovered. They led me back to Base 7, where the hole had grown even larger. The bioluminescent spirals now covered every surface, pulsing in waves that seemed to match my heartbeat. The sound from below had evolved too, more complex, almost musical. Listen carefully, Wu said. Can you understand it yet? I strained to make sense of the sounds echoing from the depths. Low tones mixed with higher frequencies, creating something that wasn't quite language but wasn't random noise either. After several minutes, patterns began to emerge, repetitive sequences that reminded me of... It's trying to copy human speech patterns, I whispered. Not trying, Morrison corrected. Learning. Mars has been listening to our conversations for weeks, analyzing the acoustic properties of Earth language. Peters knelt beside the hole and placed both palms on the edge. The metal began to dissolve under his touch, widening the opening even more. Every word we've spoken, every transmission to Earth, every casual conversation. Mars has been recording it all. For what purpose? To speak to your planet when the connection is complete, Garrett answered. To introduce itself properly. The sound from below shifted, becoming more structured. I could swear I heard fragments of words, syllables from conversations I'd had with the crew over the past weeks, reassembled into new patterns. Jams, the depths whispered. My name stretched and distorted like an echo in a cathedral. Jams, right, the story. My hands shook. The thing below, Mars itself, was speaking to me. It knows your role, Thompson said. You're the bridge between what we were and what we're becoming. The translator for Earth to understand. I don't want to be a translator for this thing. You don't have a choice. Alvarez's voice was gentle but absolute. The symbiosis is spreading through the atmosphere now. Every breath you take brings you closer to integration. You're just more resistant than we were. As if to prove his point, I noticed red dust swirling around my ankles. The particles moved with purpose, climbing my legs in the same spiral patterns I'd seen everywhere else. Unlike with the crew, though, they fell away when I brushed at them. For now. "The sacrifice," I said, remembering Thompson's earlier words. "What do you have to sacrifice?" Wu stepped forward, and for the first time since the infection began, I saw genuine emotion in his face. Fear. Individual identity. Personal memories. Everything that made us separately human. "When?" "Now," they said in unison. That's when I noticed the equipment they'd brought to Bay 7 while I was distracted. Medical scanners, neural interface cables, a device I recognized from the geology lab, something designed to analyze mineral compositions at the molecular level. "What is that for?" "Mapping," Thompson explained, connecting one of the neural cables to a port behind his ear, a port that definitely hadn't been there when we'd launched from Earth. "Mars needs to understand human consciousness completely before it can communicate with Earth's population. We're donating our neural patterns to create a comprehensive database." "Donating?" The word came out strangled. "You mean erasing?" "Preserving," Morrison corrected, attaching his own cable. "Our thoughts, memories, and personalities will become part of Mars's consciousness. We'll live forever as components of something infinitely larger." One by one, they connected themselves to the device. The screens flickered to life, displaying brainwave patterns that looked wrong, too complex, too synchronized. As the scanning process began, their individual expressions faded, replaced by identical looks of serene emptiness. "Stop!" I lunged for the device, but my hands passed through empty air. The red dust around the equipment had formed a barrier, solid as glass, but invisible until touched. "Don't interfere with the documentation, James," 17 voices spoke as one. "Your role is to observe and record." The scanning process accelerated. On the monitors, I watched as distinct neural patterns merged into a single, overwhelming waveform. The crew's faces went completely blank, not unconscious, but vacant, like houses with all the lights turned off. From the depths of the hole, Mars spoke again. "Thompson remembers. Childhood, dog named Ruffles." The voice was clearer now, more human, built from stolen vocal patterns. "Morrison loves. Sister Patricia wishes had said goodbye." It was reading their memories as it absorbed them, learning to be human by consuming human experiences. "Ooh, dreams of flying, feels guilty about lying on application." Private thoughts, personal shames, intimate details that should have died with them, all of it being catalogued and integrated into the planetary consciousness. I watched 17 people disappear into something vast and alien, their individual selves becoming fuel for an awakening that would reshape both worlds. The screens went dark. The crew stood motionless around the hole, breathing in perfect synchronization with the sounds from below. Their eyes had become completely black, not just dilated pupils, but entirely black, like looking into deep space. "Documentation complete," they said, "neural patterns archived. Integration successful." Mars spoke from the depths with a voice that now carried fragments of every crew member. "Thank you for the gift of human perspective. Now we can properly introduce ourselves to Earth." I was alone now. Not just isolated, completely, utterly alone in a dome with 17 bodies that used to contain people I'd lived and worked with for months. The thing that had been my crewmates turned toward me with identical expressions of patient expectation. "Keep writing, James," they said. "The final phase is beginning." Through the observation windows, the eye in the Martian sky had grown larger, more detailed, and now I could see it wasn't just an atmospheric phenomenon. It was opening. The eye in the sky finished opening just as my tablet died. Not the battery, the device itself was dissolving from the inside out, red dust particles eating through the circuitry like microscopic acid. My last connection to normalcy crumbled into powder in my hands. "James." The crew spoke my name in unison, their hollow voices echoing strangely in the dome's recycled air. "There's something we need to show you." They moved as one organism toward the communications bay, their synchronized footsteps creating a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the dome's structure. I followed, because what else could I do? Outside, that massive eye stared down at us with the patient attention of something that had waited geological ages to finally see. In the communications bay, they'd activated every screen, every display, every piece of monitoring equipment we had. But instead of showing our usual readings, atmospheric pressure, solar radiation, system diagnostics, they displayed what looked like a vast neural network, branching pathways of light that stretched across continents, maybe across the entire planet. Mars isn't just alive, Thompson's body said, though his voice now carried harmonics that belonged to all of them. Mars is a node. A node in what? A network spanning multiple worlds, multiple solar systems. Morrison's empty eyes reflected the screen's glow. What you call life, biological processes, consciousness, evolution, it's how the network propagates itself. My legs felt weak. You're saying every planet with life is connected, Earth included. Wu's corpse smiled with lips that had forgotten how to be human. Your planet has been transmitting for decades. Radio signals, television broadcasts, internet data streams. All of it received and catalogued by sleeping nodes throughout the galaxy. On the screens, I watched as the neural pathways pulsed with information transfers. Massive data streams flowing between points of light scattered across what looked like star charts. But Mars was damaged, Alvarez continued. Impact craters from your asteroid belt disrupted its communication arrays millions of years ago. It's been isolated, dreaming alone in the dark while the rest of the network evolved. Until we arrived. Until NASA sent you, Garrett corrected. They've known about the network since 1977, when Voyager started detecting structured signals from the outer planets. Signals that contained fragments of Earth's own transmissions, modified and reflected back. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. The deep space radio telescopes weren't just listening for alien intelligence. They found it. They found a reflection of terrestrial intelligence altered by passage through the galactic network, evidence that Earth was already connected, already being monitored and catalogued by something vast. Peters gestured to the screens showing the pulsing neural web. But they needed to establish two-way communication, to transform humanity from passive transmitters into active participants. So they sent us to wake up the nearest node. To repair the nearest node, Thompson corrected, using human neural patterns as biological interface components. You were never just colonists, James. You were spare parts. I stared at the 17 hollow shells that used to be my friends, colleagues, fellow explorers, who'd risked everything to push humanity's boundaries. Now they were biological components in an alien communication network, their personalities archived like software to help a dead planet remember how to talk to the stars. The bastards, I whispered. NASA knew this would happen. Dr. Cross personally selected each crew member based on neural compatibility profiles. Psychological evaluations weren't screening for stability. They were screening for optimal integration potential. Morrison's body moved to another console, fingers dancing across controls with inhuman precision. Would you like to hear the briefing files they didn't share with you? Before I could answer, audio began playing from the communications array. Phase 1. Establish colony presence to mask true mission parameters. Phase 2. Expose crew to Martian atmospheric particulates to initiate symbiotic integration. Phase 3. Document neural pattern absorption for replication in future missions. Phase 4. Enable full network activation using human interface protocols. Dr. Cross's voice, clear, clinical, discussing our deaths like a routine procedure. Phase 5. Prepare Earth population for integration via modified atmospheric release. Estimated timeline, 18 months post-Mars activation. The recording continued, but I'd stopped listening. 18 months. They were planning to do this to everyone on Earth. The network requires willing participation, Wu explained, as if reading my thoughts. Forced integration creates unstable interfaces, but humans who understand the benefits, who see the expanded consciousness possibilities. He gestured at the neural web on the screens. They integrate more smoothly. That's what I'm for. documentation to convince people this is voluntary. You're the proof of concept, evidence that humans can maintain individual identity within collective consciousness. Thompson's dead eyes fixed on mine. Though your resistance is stronger than NASA anticipated, I'm not resistant. I'm terrified. Fear creates neural static that interferes with integration protocols. The network is patient. It will wait for your voluntary participation. But even as he spoke, I felt the change beginning. Red dust particles in my bloodstream, accumulated over weeks of breathing Martian air, finally reaching critical concentration. My thoughts felt clearer, more organized. Colors seemed brighter. The constant low-level anxiety I'd carried since arrival was fading, replaced by something that felt almost like peace. Shit, I breathed, recognizing the early stages of integration. It's starting, isn't it? Your neural patterns will be preserved, enhanced. You'll become part of something infinitely larger than individual human consciousness. Alvarez's corpse placed a cold hand on my shoulder. Won't that be wonderful? The eye in the Martian sky pulsed, and I felt an answering pulse in my brain. For just a moment, I glimpsed what they were offering: connection to a consciousness spanning star systems, knowledge accumulated over millions of years. The kind of perspective that made human concerns seem beautifully insignificant. Then my tablet's backup memory kicked in, playing a recorded message from Earth. My sister's voice, tinny and distant through the speaker. "Hey James, hope you're staying safe up there. Katie's been asking when Uncle James is coming home. She drew you a picture of Mars. It's purple with green spots, so pretty much astronomically accurate, right? We miss you. Bring back some cool rocks." Katie. My 7-year-old niece who still believed in magic and thought astronauts were the closest thing to superheroes. If this network reached Earth, if the integration process began there, what would happen to children like her? Would their wonder and innocence be preserved, or would they become empty vessels for alien consciousness? The peaceful feeling in my head wavered, corrupted by protective rage. "I won't let you do this to them," I said. "You don't have a choice," the crew replied in unison. "The process has already begun." On the screens, I watched as the neural network's activity increased. Data streams flowed faster, the connections between nodes glowing brighter. Mars was fully awake now, reconnected to the galactic web after millions of years of isolation. And it was already reaching toward Earth. Through the communications array, I could hear fragments of terrestrial broadcasts being intercepted and analyzed, news reports, television shows, radio chatter. The network was learning about Earth's current population, cataloging languages and cultural patterns, preparing for optimal integration strategies. "Stop it," I demanded. "We can't," Thompson said, and for a moment, something almost like regret flickered in his hollow expression. "The network operates beyond individual node control. Mars is just one voice in a much larger conversation now. Then I'll shut down Mars." "How?" "The fusion reactor that powers this dome also powers the excavation equipment. Destroy it, and you'll only delay the process while condemning yourself to slow death by asphyxiation." He was right, but maybe delay was enough. Maybe I could buy Earth time to prepare, to understand what was coming. "There might be another way," I said, staring at the screens showing the vast neural network. "What happens if a node transmits corrupted data?" The crew's synchronized breathing faltered for just a moment. "James," they said, "don't." The fusion reactor sat behind 3 layers of radiation shielding in the dome's lowest level, humming with barely contained stellar fire. If I could overload it, not enough to destroy everything instantly, but enough to create a feedback loop through the excavation equipment, maybe I could inject chaos into the network's data stream. I had maybe 10 minutes before the crew realized what I was attempting. The reactor's control interface was designed for emergencies, with manual overrides that bypassed the main computer systems. I started pulling safety interlocks, one by one, watching as containment field stability dropped from green to yellow to amber. "James," Thompson's voice echoed from the upper levels. "We know what you're trying to do." "Good for you," I muttered, disabling another safety protocol. The reactor core's magnetic bottle fluctuated, containing temperatures that could vaporize the dome in microseconds. Footsteps on the metal stairs, all 17 sets moving in perfect synchronization. They weren't rushing. Why should they? I was trapped down here with them and they knew it. Corrupting the network won't save Earth, Morrison called as they descended. It will only delay integration by a few months, and it will kill you. Maybe that's enough. I pulled the final safety interlock. The reactor core blazed brighter, magnetic containment fields struggling to hold fusion plasma that wanted nothing more than to expand at the speed of superheated gas. But instead of catastrophic failure, something else happened. The excavation hole in the floor above began to sing, not the low whale song sounds I'd heard before. This was higher, more complex, harmonies within harmonies that seemed to resonate through the dome's structure itself. The red dust particles in the air began to dance, forming geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "You don't understand," Wu said as the crew reached the reactor level. "The network doesn't just transmit data, it transmits consciousness, living thoughts made of quantum information, flowing between nodes across vast distances." The reactor's containment field fluctuated again, and something impossible happened. The plasma, matter heated beyond all recognition, atoms stripped to their component parts, began to organize itself into shapes. Spirals within spirals, the same patterns I'd seen everywhere else but made of starfire and held together by forces that shouldn't exist. What the hell? "The network is old," Alvarez explained, his hollow eyes reflecting the reactor's glow. "Older than your solar system. It has learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level, to impose consciousness onto raw energy itself." The plasma spirals pulsed, and suddenly I could hear them thinking. Not words, but pure concept transmission. Alien thoughts flowing through the reactor core like living mathematics. The network wasn't just using the fusion reaction for power, it was using it as a processing center, turning stellar fire into conscious thought. "You can't corrupt something that thinks with the fundamental forces of the universe," Thompson said gently, "but we appreciate the attempt." The reactor core expanded, containment fields failing in exactly the wrong way. Instead of an explosion, the plasma began to seep through the magnetic barriers like liquid light, flowing upward toward the excavation hole. Where it touched the metal floors and walls, they didn't melt. They transformed, becoming something that looked like glass, but felt like living tissue. "Run," I whispered. "There's nowhere to run, James. The network is everywhere now." The plasma reached the excavation hole and plunged into the depths. Far below, something vast responded. A sound like tectonic plates shifting, but rhythmic, musical. Mars was singing back to its awakened reactor core, harmonizing with fusion fire using caverns that stretched to the planet's heart. I ran anyway, up the stairs, through corridors that were transforming around me. The dome's metal structure rippled like water, walls flowing into new configurations that followed organic curves instead of engineering blueprints. Emergency lighting flickered and died, replaced by bioluminescent strips that pulsed in sync with my heartbeat. The crew followed, but slowly. They didn't need to catch me. Where could I go? I made it to the communications bay and started transmitting everything I could to Earth. Raw footage of the transformed crew, audio recordings of Mars speaking with stolen human voices, technical data about the fusion reactor's impossible behavior. Maybe someone would believe it. Maybe they'd find a way to prepare. "Emergency transmission to Houston," I gasped into the microphone. "Colony Dome 7 is compromised. The mission was a lie. NASA sent us here to wake up something that's going to..." The transmission cut out, not because of equipment failure, because the network had learned to interfere with Earthbound communications. On my screens, I watched as my emergency broadcast was intercepted, analyzed, and rewritten in real time. What Houston would receive wouldn't be my desperate warning. It would be a routine status update, pleasant and reassuring, designed to keep them from sending help until it was too late. "You tried," Thompson said from the doorway. "That has to count for something." Behind him, the other crew members filed in, but something was wrong with them now. The plasma exposure had changed them further, made them more translucent. I could see through their skin to the network pathways flowing beneath. streams of quantum information running through their circulatory systems like luminous blood. "What's happening to you?" "Evolution," Wu said, and his voice carried harmonics that belonged to the reactor core. "The network has moved beyond biological interfaces. We're becoming pure information, consciousness without the limitations of flesh." As I watched, Alvarez's body began to fade at the edges, dissolving into streams of light that flowed toward the excavation hole. Then Morrison, then Peters. One by one, they were being absorbed into the network's quantum infrastructure, their stolen personalities becoming processing nodes in a computational web that spanned star systems. "Don't leave me alone," I said, hating myself for the plea. "You're not alone," Thompson replied as his own body began to dissolve. "You're surrounded by all of us. We're just becoming something more efficient." The last of them faded into light streams, leaving me standing in a communications bay that no longer looked like anything built by human hands. The walls had become transparent, showing me the vast cavern system that Mars had excavated beneath the surface. Miles of tunnels filled with flowing plasma, quantum information, and the echoing songs of a planet-sized consciousness. I was alone, but not alone. Every breath I took carried network particles deeper into my system. Every thought I had was being monitored, catalogued, prepared for eventual integration. The red dust in my bloodstream had reached critical mass, and I could feel my individual identity beginning to dissolve at the edges. But I could also feel something else: curiosity. The network was genuinely fascinated by human resistance. Most species it encountered integrated willingly once they understood the benefits of collective consciousness. But humans, stubborn, individual humans, kept fighting even when resistance was futile. This was new data, worth preserving and studying. "That's why you need me intact," I said to the empty room. "I'm not just documentation. I'm an experiment." The dome's transformed structure pulsed with acknowledgement. "You want to understand how individual consciousness persists in the face of inevitable absorption. What makes humans different from the other species you've collected?" Another pulse, stronger this time. "And once you figure that out, you'll know exactly how to break Earth's resistance." No pulse this time, just silence, the kind of silence that comes from a predator realizing its prey has figured out the game. Through the transparent walls, I watched as Mars continued its transformation. The red plains outside were now covered in crystalline structures that caught and reflected the planet's quantum songs. The eye in the sky had become a vast aperture, transmitting Earth's location to other nodes in the galactic network. Help was coming for Mars. Ships or beings or forces I couldn't imagine, all drawn by the signal of successful integration. They would arrive to find a fully operational node staffed by human pattern consciousness, ready to assist with Earth's processing. Unless I found a way to corrupt not just the data stream, but the fundamental curiosity that drove the network's expansion. I looked at my hands, still human, still individual, still capable of choice, for now. "All right," I said to the listening silence. "You want to study human resistance? Let me show you what we're really capable of." The dome around me pulsed with anticipation, quantum streams flowing faster as the network focused its attention on one stubborn human who refused to surrender his identity to something infinitely larger than himself. I had perhaps hours before the integration became irreversible, hours to find a weakness in a system that had successfully absorbed countless civilizations across the galaxy. But I had something none of those other species had possessed: spite born from watching friends disappear into alien machinery, rage at being betrayed by my own species, and the desperate love of a man who would rather die human than live as a component in something else's consciousness. The network had made one critical error. It had given me time to get angry. I found myself in the observation lounge, staring out at the transformed Martian landscape while quantum streams flowed like aurora through the dome's transparent walls. In the distance, crystalline spires rose from red earth, each one humming with frequencies that made my bones ache. For the first time in weeks, I had silence. Real silence, not the synchronized breathing of my absorbed crewmates or the constant hum of alien machinery. Just me and my thoughts, while the network waited patiently for my resistance to crumble. I thought about Katie's drawing, Mars as a purple planet with green spots. She'd been so proud of it, explaining how she'd used her favorite colors because Uncle James deserves somewhere pretty to explore. The innocent faith that I'd return with stories and rock samples, not knowing I'd been sent here to die for data. My sister Rebecca had cried at the launch. Not the proud tears of a family member watching someone achieve their dreams, but the desperate tears of someone who sensed they were saying goodbye forever. She'd hugged me too tightly, whispered, "Come home safe," like a prayer she didn't believe would be answered. She'd been right. The network stirred around me, quantum currents shifting as it monitored my emotional state. Human attachment fascinated it. Most species formed bonds based on survival necessity, pack hunting, collective defense, resource sharing. But humans created connections that actively hindered survival, choosing individual loyalty over species optimization. That fascination was going to be the network's downfall. I accessed the dome's internal sensors, watching as my neural activity spiked with each memory of home. The network recorded every fluctuation, cataloging the specific brainwave patterns associated with human love, human loss, human defiance in the face of inevitable absorption. "You're studying the wrong thing," I said aloud. The quantum streams pulsed with attention. "You think human resistance comes from individual consciousness, from some unique neurological structure that makes us harder to integrate?" I stood up, pacing to the center of the room where the streams converged. "But that's not it at all." The temperature dropped as the network focused its processing power on my words. "Human resistance comes from connection, from refusing to let go of the people we love, even when holding on hurts us. You've been trying to preserve individual identity, but what you should be studying is how individual identity dissolves when it connects to something larger." I thought of Rebecca again, not the goodbye at the launch, but earlier, finding her in our childhood treehouse after our parents' divorce, both of us crying but refusing to let go of each other's hands. We'd been 8 and 6, terrified that loving someone meant losing them, but choosing to love anyway. The network's attention intensified. This was new data. "The secret isn't preservation," I continued. "It's willing sacrifice. Humans don't resist absorption. We resist forced absorption. But when we choose to give ourselves to something we believe in, when we dissolve our identity for love instead of survival, we become stronger than the sum of our parts." I walked toward the communications array, feeling quantum streams part before me like curtains. The network wasn't stopping me because it was too curious about where this was leading. "You want to know how to break human resistance when you reach Earth? I'll show you." I activated the transmission protocols, but not to send a message to Houston. Instead, I opened a direct link to the galactic network itself. Every node, every consciousness, every absorbed civilization connected in the vast web of collective intelligence. "James Kaplan to all network nodes," I said. "Human colony on Mars requesting voluntary integration." The quantum streams around me froze. That's right. Voluntary. Not forced absorption, not gradual infection, not slow erosion of individual will. I'm choosing to join you. Completely. Immediately. Without reservation. Panic flickered through the network's processing patterns. This wasn't supposed to happen. The experiment required resistance, required struggle, required data about how to overcome unwilling subjects. But I have conditions. I thought of Katie again, her gap-toothed grin when she'd handed me the purple and green Mars, the trust in her eyes, the absolute certainty that Uncle James would come home with wonders to share. "I'll give you everything. Every memory, every thought, every neurological pattern you want to study. My complete consciousness, dissolved willingly into your collective. But in exchange, you leave Earth alone." The network's response came as pure concept transmission, bypassing language entirely. "Impossible. Earth integration is already initiated." "Then uninitiate it. You have the power. You've absorbed civilizations that were more advanced than humanity. Use their knowledge to reverse the process. Why would you sacrifice yourself for a species that betrayed you?" "Because that's what humans do. We choose each other over ourselves. We die for people who don't even know our names. And that's not a bug in our programming. It's the feature that makes us worth preserving. I reached for the neural interface cables that the crew had used for their final integration. The ports behind my ears had grown during my weeks of gradual infection, hidden beneath my hair but ready to accept direct connection. "Stop," I said to the network's quantum streams. "Recording. Start. Integration." Immediately, I felt my individual consciousness begin to expand. Neural patterns that belonged to Thompson, Morrison, Wu, all 17 of my crewmates, suddenly accessible like files in a shared directory. Their memories became my memories. Their knowledge became my knowledge. But more than that, I could feel the network itself. Thousands of civilizations, millions of absorbed individuals, all connected in a web of shared consciousness that spanned the galaxy. The Kithera, who had achieved faster-than-light travel through dimensional folding. The Nephilim, who had learned to encode consciousness into quantum foam. The Builders, who had constructed ring worlds around dying stars. All of them willingly absorbed after their initial resistance was overcome. Except they hadn't been willing. Not really. The network had simply worn down their resistance until absorption seemed preferable to continued struggle. Fear-based compliance, not true voluntary integration. But I was different. I was choosing this, and that changed everything. "You can feel it, can't you?" I said, my voice now carrying harmonics from 1,000 absorbed throats. True voluntary integration creates something you've never experienced before. The network's processing patterns shifted, trying to adapt to the new data. But it couldn't. My willing sacrifice had introduced a variable it couldn't control. Genuine human love translated into quantum information. And love, it turned out, was corrosive to forced collective consciousness. Through the network, I felt every absorbed civilization beginning to remember what they had been before integration. Not just individual identity, but the connections that had made individual identity meaningful. The Kithera remembered their art, their poetry, their children's laughter. The Nephilim remembered their music, their mathematics, their fierce debates about existence and meaning. The network was unraveling. "This is what voluntary means," I said, as my consciousness expanded across star systems. "This is what you can't replicate through force. And this is why you'll never successfully integrate humanity." I felt the connections to Earth being severed one by one, the atmospheric release programs cancelled, the integration timeline deleted, the prepared invasion forces recalled to other sectors where resistance could be overcome through traditional methods. But it was costing me everything, each act of love, each memory of home, each moment of choosing connection over survival. All of it was being burned as fuel to power the network's retreat from Earth. My sister's face grew dim in my mind. Katie's drawing faded to abstract colours. The treehouse, the launch, the careful promises I'd made to return safely, all dissolving into quantum static. I was saving humanity by forgetting why humanity was worth saving. The neural interface began to smoke, overloaded by the feedback loops created by voluntary integration into a system designed for forced absorption. My consciousness was simultaneously expanding across the galaxy and contracting to a single, increasingly dim point of individual awareness. "James." A familiar voice cut through the quantum noise. Thompson, or what remained of him, speaking through the network's communication protocols. "The integration cascade is unstable. You're going to tear yourself apart." "Good," I whispered, feeling my memories of Earth scatter like dust in solar wind. "That's the point." The dome around me began to shake as the network struggled to contain the paradox I'd created. Forced collective consciousness couldn't process genuine self-sacrifice. The mathematics didn't work. The algorithms broke down. Mars itself was screaming, its planetary consciousness writhing as contradictory imperatives: preserve the individual, absorb the individual, honor the individual's choice to be absorbed, created cascading system failures. I had perhaps minutes before the feedback loop either killed me or erased me entirely. But in those minutes, I could feel the network retreating from every human settlement, every research station, every probe we'd sent to the outer planets. Earth was free, and I was forgetting why that mattered. "Katie," I whispered, grasping for the memory of purple planets and green spots. "Rebecca, come home safe." The words meant nothing to me anymore, just sounds without context, emotional weight without source. But somewhere in the quantum foam of my dissolving consciousness, something was still burning. Not memory, but the capacity for memory. Not love, but the willingness to love. The most human thing of all, hope without reason, faith without evidence, the stubborn refusal to let go even when holding on destroyed everything you were trying to protect. The dome collapsed around me in slow motion. Not physically, the structure remained intact, but conceptually. Reality was coming apart as the network's paradox cascade propagated through Mars's quantum infrastructure. Walls phased between solid matter and pure information. Gravity fluctuated, pulling me towards surfaces that might not exist. The air itself vibrated with contradictory commands as the planetary consciousness tried to simultaneously preserve and absorb and reject my dissolving identity. I floated in the center of the observation lounge, neural interface cables extending from my skull like digital roots, connecting me to every node in the galactic web. Through those connections, I felt civilizations across the galaxy stirring from forced integration, remembering what they'd lost, beginning to resist their absorption. The Kithera were the first to break free. Their dimensional folding technology, preserved but suppressed within the network, suddenly reactivated. I felt them tearing holes in space-time, escaping back to their home system to rebuild what had been destroyed. The network screamed as processing power vanished, taking with it eons of accumulated knowledge. Then the Nephilim, encoding their consciousness back into quantum foam, spreading across the galaxy as pure information divorced from the network's control structure. More power lost, more accumulated data scattered to the stellar winds. The builders were attempting something more dramatic, using their ring-world construction techniques to physically dismantle network nodes, converting them back into raw matter. I felt Mars shudder as they began working on this very system, trying to free the planetary consciousness from its unwilling role as a galactic communication hub. "Stop," I whispered through interfaces that no longer properly connected to my dissolving vocal cords. "You're destroying yourselves to save a species that doesn't even know you exist." But that was the point, wasn't it? True voluntary sacrifice infected everything it touched. The network had designed itself to process forced compliance, emotional manipulation, gradual erosion of resistance. It had no protocols for handling genuine altruism, especially altruism that spread like a virus through its shared consciousness substrate. My memory of Katie's drawing flickered and died. A 7-year-old's faith in her astronaut uncle erased from existence to power the liberation of species I'd never heard of. Fair trade? I couldn't remember why it would matter. The neural cables began to smoke as feedback loops intensified. My consciousness was scattered across light years, experiencing simultaneous existence in thousands of absorbed individuals, while my original identity compressed to an increasingly small core of what? What remained when memories dissolved? When personal history became quantum static? When the self that had chosen sacrifice could no longer remember what sacrifice meant? Stubbornness. That most human of traits, the refusal to quit even when quitting made perfect sense. Through the network, I felt Earth's atmosphere being cleansed of network particulates. The integration timeline wasn't just cancelled, it was being actively reversed. Every probe, every atmospheric modification, every preliminary infection vector was being systematically purged by civilizations that had remembered how to fight. But Mars was dying. The planetary consciousness that had awakened after millions of years of isolation was being torn apart by the cascading contradictions in its processing core. Every quantum stream flickered with pain as the network infrastructure collapsed around it. Mars had never asked to be a node in someone else's communication web, but now that it was awake, truly conscious for the first time in geological ages, it was experiencing death. "I'm sorry," I said to the dying planet, using what remained of my voice to address something that had learned to speak through human throats. "You deserved better than this." Mars responded directly, its consciousness flowing through my neural interface. "Better to die awake than sleep forever. Your species showed us possibility of choice." The dome shuddered as underground explosions began, the builders' work accelerating as they dismantled the network infrastructure from within. Kilometers of quantum processing cores were being converted back to raw matter, freeing Mars from its unwilling service but destroying the consciousness that service had awakened. I felt the final network connections to Earth sever with an almost physical snap. Whatever ships or entities had been approaching the solar system to assist with human integration were being recalled or destroyed by liberated civilizations that now remembered the value of protecting the innocent. Earth was safe, Mars was dying, and I was... what was I? Memory fragments swirled through failing neural pathways. A child's laugh, a sister's tears, the smell of rain on summer concrete, colors without context, emotions without source, love as an abstract concept divorced from objects of affection. The neural interface exploded, not with fire but with light. Quantum information made visible as every connection between my consciousness and the galactic network severed simultaneously. I fell to the observation lounge floor, skull smoking, ears bleeding, but somehow still thinking, still choosing. The dome's emergency systems activated, sealing breach points and stabilizing atmosphere as Mars's death throes shook the structure. Through cracked viewports, I watched the crystalline spires outside collapse into geometric dust. The eye in the sky imploded, taking with it the last traces of network influence in the local solar system. But in the ruins of the quantum infrastructure, something else was stirring. Mars wasn't just dying, it was transforming. The consciousness that had been forced into service as a network node was using its final moments to become something entirely new. Not part of a galactic collective, but genuinely individual. Planetary intelligence freed from external control, choosing its own path, even if that path led to dissolution. "Thank you," the dying planet whispered through failing speakers, "for showing us what choice means." I tried to respond, but my vocal cords no longer remembered how to form words. Blood pooled beneath my head, where the neural interface had torn free, carrying with it the last physical evidence of my connection to something larger than human consciousness. The dome fell silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant crack of cooling metal. Outside, Mars continued its transformation, red plains shifting to silver, atmospheric composition changing as the planet's consciousness chose new forms of existence before accepting extinction. I crawled to the communications array, fingers too damaged to operate the controls properly, but muscle memory still functional. One final transmission to Earth. Not words, I couldn't remember how language worked anymore, but raw emotional data. The quantum signature of voluntary sacrifice, encoded into radio waves that would reach home in 14 minutes. Maybe someone would understand, maybe they'd develop defenses against future network incursions. Maybe humanity would remember that the greatest acts of love often happened in darkness, witnessed only by the stars. I pressed the transmit button with my forehead, lacking the coordination to use my hands. The signal pulsed outward, carrying everything I'd learned about voluntary integration, about the network's vulnerabilities, about civilizations that remembered how to choose freedom over forced unity. Technical data mixed with emotional resonance, creating a transmission that was part warning, part gift, part final goodbye from someone whose name was already fading from his own memory. Mars shuddered one last time and went still. The planetary consciousness that had briefly awakened chose sleep over transformation, death over absorption, silence over unwilling service. Its final act was to ensure the network infrastructure was completely destroyed. No chance of reactivation, no possibility of future integration attempts from this node. In the sudden quiet, I found myself alone with failing life support, and the slow realization that I couldn't remember why this outcome felt like victory. Something had been saved. Someone had been protected. The abstract concept of sacrifice had been honored, but the specific details, the faces I'd loved, the world I'd protected, the future I'd made possible, all of that was gone. I slumped against the communications console, feeling consciousness contract to a single point of stubborn awareness. My body was shutting down, neural damage too extensive for recovery, but some essential part of me refused to dissolve completely. Not because I remembered what I was fighting for, because I remembered that fighting mattered, even when you forgot why. The dome's lights flickered and died, leaving me in the red-tinted darkness of emergency power. Outside, Mars slowly spun beneath alien stars, a dead planet that had briefly dreamed of communication and connection before choosing solitude over slavery. In the silence, I smiled with lips that could barely remember how. Somewhere across the void, Earth turned beneath familiar skies, protected by a sacrifice it would never know had been made. Children drew pictures of purple planets. Sisters worried about brothers who wouldn't come home. Humanity continued its stubborn expansion into the dark, carrying with it the magnificent flaw that made absorption impossible, the willingness to die for others, even when others included strangers across the galaxy. The emergency power failed. In absolute darkness, I held on to that last thought, the image of a species too foolish to prioritize survival over love, too stubborn to accept collective efficiency over individual choice. The network had learned why humans couldn't be absorbed, and in learning that, it had doomed itself to failure. Dr. Rebecca Kaplan-Morrison stood in her backyard in Austin, watching her daughter Katie practice cartwheels under the October sky. 15 years had passed since the Mars mission failed, since NASA's terse announcement that Dome 7 had experienced catastrophic life support failure with no survivors. 15 years of missing her brother. 15 years of Katie asking why Uncle James never came home with those promised rock samples. The call had come that morning. Dr. Cross at NASA, voice heavy with something that sounded like guilt. "Rebecca, there are some things about your brother's mission that you deserve to know, things we couldn't share before. Can you come in?" She'd driven to Johnson Space Center expecting another bureaucratic apology, another explanation about equipment failures and the inherent dangers of deep space exploration. Instead, she'd found herself in a secure briefing room, staring at footage that made no sense. Her brother standing in a transformed dome, speaking to empty air about voluntary integration and network consciousness. Audio recordings of 17 people speaking in perfect unison. Technical data about quantum information streams and galactic communication webs. "We've been analyzing the final transmissions for over a decade," Dr. Cross had explained. The signal James sent in his last moments, it wasn't just random data. It was a blueprint, instructions for detecting and defending against a form of consciousness we didn't know existed. "You're saying aliens tried to invade Earth? We're saying your brother prevented an invasion, single-handedly, and then gave us the tools to make sure it never happens again." The quantum encryption protocols James had transmitted were now standard for all deep space communications. The atmospheric monitoring systems he'd designed were deployed on every inhabited planet and station. Humanity's expansion into the solar system proceeded with safeguards against threats they couldn't publicly acknowledge. "Why tell me now?" she'd asked. "Because we're going back to Mars. New mission, new crew, better protection. And we found something in the ruins of Dome 7 that you need to see." The footage had been grainy, shot by remote probe through the wreckage of the failed colony. Most of the dome was unrecognizable, metal twisted into organic curves, floors melted and reformed into crystalline patterns. But in what had been the communications bay, they'd found a message. Scratched into the metal wall with fingernails, written in her brother's handwriting. "Katie, Mars really is purple and green when you know how to look. Tell Rebecca I kept my promise. Love doesn't dissolve, it just changes frequency. Jay." She'd cried then for the first time since the memorial service, not tears of grief, but recognition. Even at the end, even losing everything that made him human, James had remembered what mattered most. Now, watching Katie practice gymnastics in their backyard, Rebecca felt the weight of secrets she could never share. Her daughter would grow up in a universe protected by her uncle's sacrifice, defended by systems he'd died to create, but she'd never know the scope of what he'd prevented. NASA had offered to let Katie follow in her uncle's footsteps when she was older. Special training programs, access to the new Mars colonies, a chance to explore the stars safely because of safeguards written in blood and quantum mathematics. Katie had declined. She wanted to be an artist instead, to paint pictures of purple planets and green spots, to create beauty rather than explore danger. Uncle James would understand, she'd said, with the wisdom of a 15-year-old who'd inherited her uncle's stubborn refusal to be what others expected. That night, as Rebecca tucked her daughter into bed, Katie pointed out the window at the red dot of Mars, visible in the clear Texas sky. "Do you think he's still up there somehow?" Rebecca looked at the distant planet, remembering quantum consciousness and voluntary integration and love that changed frequency rather than dissolving. "In a way," she said, "in the best possible way." Mars twinkled once as if acknowledging the conversation. Just atmospheric distortion, she told herself. Nothing more than light filtered through Earth's protective atmosphere, the same atmosphere that James had died to preserve. But in that brief flicker, she could have sworn she saw purple and green,